for those 4 or 5 years, it was easy money. It was foolproof for those 4 or 5 years. People made literally millions and millions and millions of dollars off of this stuff. But as I said before, AAA started drying up. This is where the bulk of the money was coming from. This was pension money. You had way too many of these, not nearly enough of the AAA, so they came up with the idea of what's called the tranche. And this is also where AIG starts to come into the picture. So this is where I consider the beginning of the end game here. Basically what you have is they would take, in this case I think this might be 20, but let's say this is 1,000 AAA rated mortgages. They would remove 10% of them, 10% of these AAAs, right? They take them out, they replace it with 4 subprime junk type mortgages. Now what their computer models were telling them, and this is from Wall Street, this would be the Lehman Brothers and Merrill and all the rest. Their computer models told them this is no more risky than having all of these being green and being AAA. Basically, by just removing 10%, putting in 10% of a little bit more risky, overall, this is still not a risk factor. Unfortunately for them, the pension funds and Wall Street wasn't willing to jump on board with this. Moody's was not willing to stamp this as safe AAA. So enter AIG. AIG is an insurance company. Their bread and butter for decades was municipal bonds, very safe insurance. They decided to get on board with this. They looked at what was going on here and they saw, an opportunity to get into this. Bear Stearns also, much smaller player in this. They also decided what they did is they would write an insurance policy over this, saying, you know what, Wall Street, if you buy this, we'll insure it. If this goes bad, we'll pay you. Moody's looked at this and said, well, with the insurance policy, we can rate this AAA. This made the pension funds happy. They said, well, Moody's is saying it's now AAA. We have a backstop of AIG. They're insuring the whole thing. What could go wrong? So this goes into wide practice. I mean, this sort of thing had been going on before, but this goes into full-scale production. Billions and billions, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars are sold this way. Okay, so you've probably all heard, possibly if you pay attention to the news, the word credit default swap. Basically, that's AIG. That is their insurance policy that they would write. You would have Bank of America, Chase, Citigroup, all the other big banks. Basically, AIG at the top here had already sold these insurance policies off to Wall Street. This would be no different than if I took an insurance policy out on you for $100,000. I now have the signed insurance policy in my hand, and I'm thinking, well, what if I take this and I sell it off to somebody else? I can actually increase my money flow, so I don't actually have to sit on this. So I can take it and maybe sell it for pennies on the dollar out in the market and let somebody else hold the paper, let them deal with consequences. And that's exactly what AIG, Bear Stearns, famously were doing. So not only were they writing insurance policies on what essentially turned out to be junk, they had the audacity to go one step further and actually start selling those signed insurance policies off to Bank of America, Chase, Citigroup. Now the funny thing is, Bank of America, on one side of its operations, were pushing out these mortgages. The risk assessment side of their houses were out buying AIG credit default swaps. One side of the house had no idea what the other side was doing. They were basically, in some cases, hedging both sides. They were selling risky mortgages on one side and buying these credit default swaps on the other side. And one side of the house had no idea what the other side was doing. You had mortgage brokers pushing, and then you had risk management on the other side buying these credit default swaps thinking they were being so clever. It turns out it was a gigantic mess. So, the black swan. This is a concept known to people in risk management, the idea of the black swan is the idea of the outlier or the unexpected, the truly unexpected. 9/11 is a black swan event. Everything is going along normal, and something happens that fundamentally changes all expectations after that. That is, a true black swan event. 9/11 is a perfect example. So where did the black swan that started this whole downturn come from? It wasn't quite as big of a deal as 9/11, but it was, as I said, I felt it was the rise in oil prices, peak oil. Basically started pushing prices up across the board. Oil, gasoline, all feed into everything, agriculture, transport, electrical production, everything. So what you start seeing is, here we have that same fund. You start seeing more and more mortgages. A lot of the subprime starts falling out. But not only that, you start to see AAA, people who are considered, good credit risks. They start losing their nice, blue collar, white collar jobs. Even some of these mortgages, in much larger numbers, start falling out of the funds. Problem is now this deflationary spiral has started to assert itself again. People start getting defensive. They start laying off people. 2007, you start to see the unemployment rate start to rise. People start to get fearful again. Less people are buying mortgages. Less people are buying cars. GM. I worked for a big 10 auto supplier. This was a really horrible year, 2007. Everything starts spiking in prices. Foreclosures start to swamp the funds. The funds start, there's nobody left to plug it. Not enough money is coming up from, Fannie and Freddie anymore. These funds actually start to have funding problems. People are coming to the funds now saying, you know what, I'm done. I want out. Give me my money. I'm selling. Too many people started charging. Remember, runs on the bank. That applies here. Too many people started charging these funds, and summer 2007 to me is the beginning. The actual. No longer are you at the beginning of the end. You're actually in the end game by 2007 in the summer. I remember vividly. I was in Ames, Iowa, during the Republican conventions they had out there. And that weekend, Bear Stearns, some other big funds, basically doing this exact same thing. They froze up. They had to quit. They basically had to freeze the funds and stop selling. And the Dow dropped some 470 points that day, and kind of started this whole thing in motion. So basically, I'll bring us right up to date here and finish up where we're at. Okay, so you have the collapse that started in 2008. From Bear Stearns in the summer of 2007, one thing after another happened. The government refused to acknowledge the fact that this was all going south on them, and they had completely lost control. They had no concept of what was happening here. The Treasury Department turned a blind eye to a lot of this, and it took them a long time to weed through all this to figure out, how was the collapse happening. They had no clue. They thought they could just throw some money at it. This would have been, Bush was putting out his $300, $600 stimulus. He really thought that he could just, throw a little Band-Aid over this whole thing and it'd all be fine. They had no clue what was going on. So by the winter of 2008, this would be October, November, December, the worst of the collapse. This would be the Paulson TARP fiasco. Actually, to be honest, once we got to this point, they really were looking at an Armageddon situation. If AIG is allowed to fail, and they have sold all of these insurance policies all over the board, nobody knows who's holding these. What ends up happening is, you have the banks sitting in the middle. These are the banks that previously had been, selling these mortgages. They thought they were safe. The risk management people were saying, we have insurance policies, we're safe. Well, things started to go south. These mortgages started going south. The